Hello, coworkers. You're listening to the second episode of Juicy Radio. I'm your host, Tony Bacigalupo, and in this episode, I'll be talking with Manu Vega, the founder of Cuenca Coworking in Ecuador, which since 2014 has grown from a 1970s townhouse to 8 locations throughout the country. In addition to that, he was a speaker at TEDx Cuenca and is leading a new effort dubbed Co-Latam, which aspires to bring together the co-working space owners of the region and even offer a regional visa program. He also takes a personal interest in helping some of the businesses in his spaces, sometimes making personal investments or contributions to help a project get off the ground. You'll be hearing about one project in particular that he helped to get going in the course of this interview. For a man who runs half the nation's locations, Manu seems to be very hands-on, but that doesn't stop him from thinking on the grander scale. He notes, for example, the importance of co-working in a nation whose economy depends so heavily on oil. Since oil prices are so low at the moment, lots of people are looking for increasingly diverse ways to make a living. Manu sees co-working as being a critical path to diversifying the economy. In the course of our conversation, we covered topics ranging from drones that count bananas to the impact that autonomous cars will have on the future of co-working spaces, and of course the state of co-working in South America in general as we lead up to the Juicy South America Conference in March. Manu will be one of the speakers at that conference, which takes place on March 3rd and 4th. Tickets are available now at sa.gcuc.co. Again, sa.juicy.co. Now, without further ado, here's Manu telling us a little bit about how he got his start and an overview of a few of his locations.
I started this because I'm an entrepreneur and I started a stockbroker software company and I have 20 employees. And to a point, I needed to accelerate the way my people were working. They were learning how they opened up to new experiences and push them further. And a co-working space was just obvious at that point. So it grew from there. And then we have another space that has become more of a real estate type business, but they have classes there. They do English classes, Japanese classes, neuro-linguistic programming. They do there as well. And then there's multiple companies. We try to diversify the types of companies we have in our spaces, so it's more balanced. We have another one that's with a PayPal type business that's called Payphone here in Ecuador because e-commerce doesn't really happen here. So it's going to start with this because the banks have agreed to allow this for to pay online. We have that, and then we have a co-working space inside of the university, which is the 4th one we've made here in Cuenca. And it's getting projects out of students, but also fast-tracking them by working inside of a co-working space outside of the university. Just there, talk to other entrepreneurs, manage that, and manage a community that is open and allows you to have conversations that allow you to further your project or whatever it is you're doing. So that's been interesting, trying to work the academia out of certain processes of being an entrepreneur and also not dropping out of school to do it, of course.
Okay, so if you're like me, when you're hearing this story, off the bat, immediately I'm wondering, gosh, this is a lot of stuff. There's a lot of different kinds of businesses and just a bunch of different locations. It's a heck of a story already, and we're just getting started. So I asked Manu to tell me a little bit more about how he got started. Let's rewind, talk about the background behind this. How did it get financed? What are the circumstances that made all of this possible? Back to Manu.
As I said, I have my own business. I develop software. Right now I have 15 programmers working for me. And it's hard here to get financing or have a startup here. But I was lucky enough to find somebody that I could work with, and I got the financing for this. So I had the budget to get a big house. I have a 70s house, a really big 70s house. And I always liked the vibe of the place in a good neighborhood that's accessible to most people. And I found another house that I already considered making into a co-working space. I am involved with TEDx Cuenca. I was a speaker last year, and 2 years ago, I met them, and I met a whole bunch of entrepreneurs that was open to doing many, many things. And I met Fabian Bermeo, who's the other mentor here, the creator of this idea of how we manage our co-working spaces. And that's where things were coming together. I had the space, the people were coming together, and then we started it was pretty organic the way we started talking to each other, how everything was working together. And that's how we came to one co-working space. We have 35 people in this first space, and we started it in May of 2014. the first space. That was when we started this.
Okay, so now we have a good idea of how the space came together. But how about the community? How did people actually start getting involved in this? And how did that culture start to really emerge?
We started having these brainstorming sessions with our own projects. We want to do this. We need an app for this. We need a website for this, or projects that we could do together. And that's what really brought the community together. And after hours, we open usually at 7:30 in the morning, and it goes up to like 8 at night. And while we were at it, we would stay like from 6 to 7 p.m. and we would stay talking about ideas, projects. Some people here have more experience. The entrepreneur scene, especially with projects that involve innovation or adding value to most things, is rare here. So it was interesting because most people would come to a place like this because they would understand what it was for. And then the concept is very new here in Ecuador. So they would come together, they would bring their friends or people that were doing projects. So it would start to be a community that would help each other out. So that shaped the way we manage a community.
So it's interesting, and there are a lot of interesting things already that Manu's been talking about. But what you can see here is that there's a philosophical framework behind why he's doing this that's not just about renting the space. In fact, it's not about renting the space at all. There's a reason that he's bringing these people together, and it has to do with his own business, it has to do with his own interests and his own passions. But that starts with the development of a cultural core. And that cultural core is one that's not just of people who happen to be working in the same place together, but people who are actually looking for opportunities to support one another actively. And you see that in the way that he started his community as a way of people getting together after hours, talking about what they're doing together, and looking for opportunities to help one another. This forms sort of the beginning of the philosophical framework and the cultural norms, really, that are going to end up powering these communities to go from just one location to many. So then I asked Manu to explain a little bit more about how this works as a business. Where does this fit into his existing businesses? Does he operate this as a venture unto itself, or where does this all fit into things?
I don't see it more for the business. I do charge rent, for example, in this space. But, well, mostly I have the biggest company here, of course, in this co-working space. So cost-wise, it's okay, but it's not a money-making machine. I don't think I would do this unless I had the backing of my own company behind it on the first space because of the nature of this space, and especially at the beginning. Then it's grown out to different things and consulting services with the university and other types of projects. But the idea was not to charge too much for the space or services that wouldn't make too much sense, but for the space, the community, and of course, fast internet and security and workspace, of course. But we wanted to focus it more on the community more than the real estate. We really consider the real estate business. I don't know, in some cases it's interesting because we can actually go about it with it. But in other cases, it's best to try to find a way for it to be free or closer to free for the people that want to work here. And we've achieved that in a couple of the spaces we have. So it also involves more people getting into it, talking about it, and helping out other projects.
So in Manu's world, and remember, this is a world where he runs 8 different kinds of spaces, and each of them seems to really actually be pretty different from each other. It actually makes more sense to keep the cost as low as possible because the real value to him is the people. So if he can get the people into the space and he can keep the cost low so he can get more people in, that actually works out to being more valuable to him, which is just awesome to me. I find that really interesting. So then that begs the question, how does this fit into the culture in Ecuador? How does he communicate with people who he talks to about what he's doing? How do people in that culture receive co-working? Do they understand what it is? How does it fit into the way that Ecuadorians do things?
I have awesome SEO because Coworking Cuenca is the name of my coworking. So whoever looks for it, one of the spaces, they'll find us super quick on social media or on Google. But when I run into people and I have to explain what this is or what it is we do, a lot of people lately have understood that, but at the beginning, you had to explain, we're entrepreneurs, we try to do this, we try to create a community. If you have an idea, tell us, because here the idea is how people deal with business ideas is don't tell anybody. It's better to die with the idea within you than to talk to anybody about it because everybody will steal the idea or something like that. So, that part is more complex. But we've considered opening, saying, you can come here and what is it that you want to do? You want to start what type of business? Do you need to meet people? So I work as the main connector in all the spaces. And I have a connector in each one of the spaces. So what do you need? You need a designer. You need somebody for web, UX, UI, business, marketing, whatever. You can go talk to that person and further whatever it is you're trying to do. So that's the support system we try to push, even on explaining what co-working is. So people are like, oh, okay, yeah, I had this idea for this business, or I need to meet somebody that can help me out with this, or how is it that we can do this? So that brings itself together, and then they come to the space, and then they understand that this is a very relaxed space, and I have a ping pong table, I have an office dog here, and everything. So it becomes another place. So you're like, you feel home, but in another home and outside of home.
A connector inside of each co-working space. What a great idea, right? That's basically what we're doing anyway, so it should be someone's job. It should be someone's stated purpose. You're the connector in the space. This is obviously a really big part of Manu's success with his spaces. So I just asked him to go a little bit further and dive into what actually happens in terms of making these connections inside of the spaces.
Well, we call it here, it's like the mutant school. Because usually we have people that come here that have a specific skill set or have always wanted to start a business, but never been able to do so. And sometimes it's just because you don't have the networking or you don't know how to go about starting a business or having legal questions. We have a lawyer here in our co-working spaces too that helps out, and we have discounts because they're inside of the ecosystem we try to build. So there is the cultural barrier, but a lot of people really want to start their business too, or they want to freelance and they just want to have a certain amount of money a month that they can work with so they can survive being an entrepreneur at the beginning phase, of course.
In the course of our conversation, we ended up steering more towards the bigger picture and how things were going in terms of the country on the whole, and where co-working was sort of fitting into this equation, and found out that the government in Ecuador is actually pretty active in fostering co-working, and that the economy itself is actually really steering people more and more towards creative, independent sort of work lifestyles.
The government has been open to giving money to entrepreneurs if the idea is good enough, or they have their certain criteria you have to meet to have access to this, but up to $50K. So to start a business here, that is good. That allows you to do a couple of things. For example, a programmer salary, a starter, is $750 a month in Cuenca. In Quito is like $1,600. But here in Cuenca, things are a lot cheaper, and you can still get very good people to work here. So Cuenca is interesting in that sense. Right now, the vice presidency, they want to invest something like $30 million on software development companies and help out. The Software Association of Ecuador is mostly run by businesses that are from outside Oracle, Microsoft, and whatnot, and not the development community. And here in Cuenca, we have a very big community that's established a cluster, actually. And they've had access to create a little, they call it a tech village, where they can set up their businesses close by to the city. But they're required to have co-working spaces involved in their project. So they come to us to get involved with what we're doing, even though we're not just only software, but we do whatever business makes sense here. So we have contact, but I try not to have financing from them because here politics are complex and people want to get on your shoulders and call themselves tall sometimes because of it. So we're careful with that, but we do have a good relationship. A lot of members from here have ended up in public jobs, and so we have friends up there, but we try to make this survive on its own. For example, we depend on oil completely, and oil, of course, is very cheap right now. So they're very broke. So if we can survive this without them, we're going to be okay.
Unsurprisingly, this kind of environment seems to be leading to the growth of co-working spaces and just a lot of interesting economic activity.
Co-working spaces are becoming a little of fashion here in Ecuador on certain circles. For example, in Quito, one of the biggest producers of software here, it's called Kruger, he has his co-working space there. And he incubates as well and everything, but he has a really beautiful co-working space, the two top floors of a building. And now in Guayaquil, one of the richest families here is starting a co-working space with the help of the government and starting initiatives like 40 grand for the best agricultural tech project. So drones that can measure potassium. For example, we have a lot of bananas. We are a banana republic. And they have multispectral cameras on drones that allow them to see potassium on the plants. So you can have, how many plants do you have in a hectare or an acre that have bananas? Or managing mining, they can see if they're doing legal or illegal mining on a certain area with cyanide detectors or something like that. And they're doing those types of things. And a lot of people come with their ideas. They 3D print their own drones and then they get these cameras. But they need like 20K to do this. And they get prizes for 40K and stuff like that. But that's what's been going on there. But because of that, here, what they wanted to do is they also want people, because of this cluster, they only take in companies that sell 100K or more a year. And for entrepreneurs that are starting, that's more complex. So a co-working space is a good ground to connect with these other spaces and have access to benefits that you would have with them. But also you can start something super small in a cheap space. For something, I can say it in meters, I think 9 square meters or 12 square meters, we charge $250. So it's not expensive. And a desk here, when you come by, it's like $50 a month. We have 30 megs internet up and down and security here and all that. So it's not expensive for you to start. Maybe not even have the 500 or 600 you would need for an office out there in the city. But here you have the networking that comes with it. So that's why they want to do it. And because it sounds more interesting, I guess, as innovative community or tech startup community they want to start, co-working spaces are necessary in that.
I asked Manu what he thinks about where co-working is going in general, especially now that there's so much interest, in part because it seems like it's a big deal going on there, but also because I know it's something that is becoming a big deal everywhere. So what's Manu's perspective on this, considering how big of a player he's been in this since basically the beginning?
I think it's going in a healthy way. I think this is a trial and error process mostly because of the reality we live in and accepting this. But co-working just makes sense once you understand it. So I think when politics get involved too much in this or the spaces have a heavy political agenda, then you see a problem because it becomes a fight of egos of what's better. And then you start having to do things that you wouldn't normally do and the community would be affected by it. But also you get a free space. So, I think those spaces will be there and they will work themselves out, I guess, over time. But the private spaces, I think that's interesting. Some have become incubators. Some, are outlets to giving money out to entrepreneurs, which is always good. I mentor many, many projects right now. And I have 3 of them that are trying to access 40 grand in a prize here in the coming weeks, I think in 2 weeks. So I think that's interesting. But also the little spaces that are becoming little communities and cities. For example, Guayaquil only recently opened up one co-working space, and it's like a 3 million people city. But the culture there is harder, to share your ideas or to be seen or doing things, egos, entrepreneur egos, I'm sure, is the matter of that. But now it started in little communities. For example, there's one that's called El Invernadero, and I've seen them support many women-oriented entrepreneurs. And they've invited many of the women that work here to go over there to Guayaquil and meet them and all that. And we're starting another co-working space in Guayaquil right now inside of the university. So it's interesting to see that type of community spring out and have a purpose more than just the space, but the community is oriented to a certain way. So I think the diversity that co-working spaces bring, even in our spaces, each one of them is super different, and some are managed by different people completely, and it takes different turns. And I think that diversity is what makes it healthy, because co-working is just too broad to just say, oh, that's that. And I don't think you can see in a bad light helping people out to start businesses in a time where things are more complicated in the economy, and a lot of people are losing jobs here, like a lot of them. So these people need to reinvent themselves. And co-working, I believe, is the best way to reinvent yourself, because you do it with a networking, a support system, and also being able to further your projects as fast as possible. If you want to go lean or Canvas or any other way, it's interesting because you can share these concepts. And for example, we have this little startup that gives classes. We have a lot of people, expats that come from the States, and they live here because it's super cheap. They live at like $2,000 a month, and they live really, they go out pretty much every night. and they can pay for it. And so we have a lot of people like that, but they don't know the language. So what they've done is do like an intercultural exchange. And I get like 60 people every Wednesday here at my co-working space. So if you want to do a focus group on an idea that you have and you need these people, they're here. So these types of things really come together. This other co-working space that we're starting, which yesterday we were in talks with, it's an investment from another person, and they want to have an organic supermarket under it. And then on top of that, they can have businesses, and they want to see if they can get some that are agriculturally related because they got their own farms. So it's interesting because now you have these types of entrepreneurs coming up in co-working spaces, but also working out in the land. So I think that diversity will keep it healthy for the future that we can see, because we don't know where things are going with co-working here in Ecuador. I think it's going in a healthy track, I would say.
I have to say, it's really enjoyable to hear Manu share such optimism for the direction of where things are going. Next, I asked Manu to tell a story about a particular member or a particular experience that really helps to kind of illustrate the value of the community and the kinds of opportunities that he sees emerge when this kind of a culture comes together. And boy, did he deliver on that. Check out this story.
Actually, my TEDx talk was that because it gave us a broader view of what we were doing. It was a good way to explain what it is we were doing, and it advanced what we were doing with co-working spaces. We had only 2 co-working spaces at that point. And for me, doing my TEDx talk, I tried to prove what it is I'm doing here to Cuencans that don't really trust what it is we're doing. I try to finish with, what's tangible of the work you do. And the work in preparing my talk, I had one of the companies here that was doing prosthetics, 3D printed prosthetics. And they're fairly new here. I did this in May of last year. So we don't have that much access to 3D printing. It's still starting here. It hasn't really come together. And my talk was about who am I and why I have ADD, really hard ADD. And I think that's awesome for co-working because people can walk in and out of my door and I don't care because I can snap in and out of things and not have a problem with. And that defined a lot of how I manage the space and how I can just be expansive about things and have control over a lot of things, but at the same time give myself time over little things too. And it's embracing my ADD and living with it happily. And then explaining how we started this. And then in the end, I showed what this company, this startup in Cuenca was doing. And it was creating prosthetics for $300, $400, something like that. But if you brought a prosthetic from the States or from Europe, they cost up to $6,000. And what this startup was doing is making prosthetics because they cost up to $6,000 bringing it from the States or Europe. And every year you have to change it if it's a kid because they need to be able to grow with it, But the cost is restrictive, especially for low-income families here. So $300 a year for a prosthetic made sense. So what I did, I spoke to this person and he had a client that needed the prosthetic but couldn't afford it. And I said, okay, I'll pay for it, but I want to document the process of what it is to receive a prosthetic and how it works, inside of a co-working space with this company and the process of this person. And it was a 14-year-old girl. And it was interesting because it is hard because she doesn't have part of her arm. She doesn't have her hand and a little bit of her arm. She has the elbow, but that's it. But it's good because with that, she can actually have movement in her hand. And now she can ride a bicycle. She can grab her hair when she's combing it. So she can do these types of things. And it was interesting to do this and see her face change throughout the process because she became happier, more empowered. And it was interesting and then I gave her a bicycle in the end, of course, because that's something she really wanted to do from the beginning. And I did that in pictures, showing it in the TEDx talk. And then in the end, she came out and she said hello with her prosthetic hand and whatnot. And that opened the concept to like 500 people that were there. And also to the university where we did the TEDx talk. And that started this experimentation we're doing at the university with Universidad Politécnica Salesiana. And it opened up a whole bunch of doors and a lot of conversation, a lot more respect for doing these types of things, of being an entrepreneur and not just, being the entrepreneur god that doesn't really do much, but talks about, we should do this, we should do that. And we try to base this on people that are entrepreneurs. If you do only a consulting part of it, it can only be a couple. We need entrepreneurs in this. to lead the process. And it really connected us to something bigger. I believe that was something that really changed the size of what we were doing, the scope, and now what we're doing in the university. For example, they've brought a couple of PhD undergrads to study what it is we're doing with this because they want to take it to Italy and Serbia. So yesterday, one of the Italians that was here was leaving, and we had a dinner with him, and he was super happy, and he invited me to go over there and everything. But he created these synergies, these connections with other people. And the university brings, a lot of heavyweights. For example, an economic consultant to the European Union. And we got him in our co-working space, for example, the one in the university, which is available to any of the members of any other co-working spaces. So you start bringing these people, and then there's different types of conversations that happen. So I think that brings the synergy we need to what we're doing. So that's something that moved me in this process.
Which brings us to GCUC South America. So I asked Manu, what does he think about GCUC South America? Where does he see that fitting into the picture?
I'm really interested in seeing what GCUC South America will be like, because I like the anarchy of co-working, because you can do whatever the hell you want if you're good enough, because I have learning problems. But I've been able to teach myself and do a lot of self-learning, and this space has allowed me to do that, so I feel that part of it. And I want to see what Latin America does in that sense, how they want to do things. And it's very different from the States, even what I saw from what they did in China. The big cities is different, but here, trying to open up the concept even further, I think that's going to be very interesting in comparison to what the U.S. version is, because that's more of a business-oriented real estate, how much do they make per square feet type deal. Seeing Brand Newber and seeing him, come up with it, it was super interesting because he talks about starting it in a holistic house in Berkeley. And that community sense, having people like that in your community as entrepreneurs, as part of co-working spaces, is something that I always believed was necessary. People that create community, that, come up to you and talk to you during the day. And seeing that from him is interesting because I think Latin America will reflect a lot more on that, on trying to create community and good vibes, doing this out of your heart and trying to make this happen. And if I can make it happen, you can make it happen. And if we can help each other and make business out of this, I think that'll be a way for this to grow and for businesses to start to flourish, because that's the conversation we haven't been having. We've been in the box a lot more square type businesses. So I think that is something interesting from GCUC South America that I'm hoping to see. I'm bringing what I do, my story of co-working spaces over there, and we're going with the people from the university so they can share their experiences. So I want to see how that works out in the bigger groups, and what Brazil's doing, and what Chile's doing, what Colombia's doing. I think it'd be interesting to see how we can share experiences with that and see where we can take this. Maybe outside of Ecuador, maybe not, maybe bring people out. Or we have CoLatam that we've been working with Latin American people that went to GCUC USA and try to have a co-working visa throughout South America, which would be interesting as well to work with. So it would be a benefit for members that move more, and also, do the cross-pollination between not just our spaces, but with other countries, and see what we can do together, of course. Down the line from that, I'm interested in going, of course, to Italy and Serbia to see what they're doing with their co-working spaces there in the startup communities. Be interesting, and just maintain the company culture we've been working on for so long. So the new spaces that add up to our co-working ecosystem that we're calling it can become something else. The universities is also something that has to flourish too, because we have many, many projects, the drones with the cameras that we're working on. I'm mentoring them, but we need to get 20 or 30 projects out of that. It's a 25,000 people university that has 4 campuses throughout the country. So it's interesting to see where that will head, and see if we can actually get the little co-working bug in those people that, in most cases, their parents say, go get a stable job. Don't be an entrepreneur. Don't, risk it. Don't try anything like that. But while they're still in school, they can try this out while they're studying and try their luck with a startup, and maybe even get financing and take it from there, a more organic flow towards getting your own business. So I think that'll bring new things, new ideas, new coworkers, and a lot of development inside of it, more than services, more than design or freelancing. But established businesses that started out with innovation in their mind. I think that'll bring a lot of good things, and just I think we want to grow to 10 spaces by the end of the year. That was our goal, and see where it goes. See where Ecuador goes, and where Latin America heads. That's what I think we're going to do.
Finally, I asked Manu to give me his perspective on where he sees co-working as a movement going and where it fits into the future of work as we know it, charting out maybe 10 years to, say, 2026.
One of the things we spoke with this economic advisor to the European Union that was interesting, and it was my question. And I said, if cars drive themselves, the shift and jobs and people that will lose their jobs and will have to figure themselves out once again, what's the impact to co-working space and that? And it was, of course, a very smart guy. He said half of the people that will have that situation will probably go to co-working spaces, and the other half will figure it out on their own, doing something else. But I think those shifts that will happen more often in the future, only a community can help you launch yourself back into the world. And that adaptability, I think, is what makes co-working an idea that's solid for the next 50 years minimum, or whatever is invented afterwards. But the community of it. And most people will be mobile. The people that have their first computer, too, will be a phone. So these people are bound to come up to a co-working space, even to meet with their friends or to do something else, or just to bring an idea and talk it out, or do things like that. So I think that's where co-working spaces can always fit. One of the things we always said was, even if you sold your business and you made $10 million, what would you do? I would still run a co-working space just to see what happens. Empowering more and doing more, or just starting other businesses, I don't know. It's just awesome.
So that's it for our second episode. If you're listening to this, then that means you made it all the way to the end of this episode. Thanks for following along. So what'd you think about Manu's story? What stuck out for you? Shoot me your thoughts by emailing me at tony@nwc.co or on Twitter at TonyBGOODE, or shoot a tweet to Juicy at GCUC USA. To learn more about and purchase tickets for the upcoming Juicy South America Conference on March 3rd and 4th in Sao Paulo and in Los Angeles on May 3rd to 6th, head to juicy.co, that's gcuc.co. Also, on my end of things, I just launched a new project to help co-working spaces get started and help existing ones do better. It's called New Work Cities, and it's building on all of my experience that I had building my own co-working space in New York called New Work City, as well as working with some other awesome folks who are involved in the co-working world all over the world. So to learn more about that and how I can help you out with your co-working community, head to nwc.co/consulting or just shoot me an email. For Juicy Radio, I'm Tony Bacigalupo signing off. Viva la co-working!
Yay!